Sam Altman wrote a new blog post on January 5th called Reflections. And the big headline from this blog post is that Sam Altman is claiming now that OpenAI knows how to build AGI, that the artificial general intelligence that people have been speculating about for years now, that OpenAI has been sort of hinting at, that they are within sight of that goal and that he believes it could happen very quickly, and they are already starting to look past AGI to ASI, to artificial superintelligence. So, Casey, what did you make of this blog post? Casey, we have more news from over the break about one of our favorite topics, AI.
Boy, do we. It was a huge couple of weeks for AI, Kevin, during a time of year when normally the news cycle gets pretty slow.
I was wondering about that because usually in December, people are sort of getting ready to go on holiday break. The news kind of trails off, but not this year. The AI labs were sort of trampling all over each other to try to get their big news out before the end of the year.
Yeah, and I think it was led by OpenAI, which of course announced their 12 days of shipmas, where they tried to announce something's big, something small every day for 12 days. And, they did wind up ending on something pretty important, I think.
Yes. So this is all moving very fast. There's a lot to catch up on today. And I want to take some time to really dig into what happened and what we can expect for the first few months of the new year. But before we get into all that, Casey, you have something to tell us.
I do. So, Kevin, of course, our listeners' trust is of paramount importance to us. And so I wanted to let folks know about something that happened in my life that I just think I want to be upfront about, which is that at the end of 2023, I met a man who had many wonderful qualities. One of those qualities that I loved was that he worked for a company I'd never heard of, which meant, fine, I could keep doing my job as normal. But as of this week, Kevin, my wonderful boyfriend started a job at a company we talk about sometimes on the show. He is a software engineer at Anthropic.
Is his name Claude?
Many people have written to me asking me if I fell in love with Claude. And while I do find it to be very useful for some things, no, this was a human man that I am currently in love with.
I've met him. He's real. Yeah. Can confirm. He's wonderful. But yes, you are disclosing that you have this new, let's call it an entanglement, because this is a company that you and I talk about, that you also cover in Platformer. And so we just wanted our listeners to know that this is happening out in the world and in your life, and that is there anything more you want to say about this?
Yeah, I mean, people have some questions about this. Like, I did not play any role in my boyfriend getting this job. Anthropic didn't know about our relationship before this happened. Of course, we have since told them about this. I do plan to continue writing, reporting about Anthropic because I think it's a really important company. But whenever I do that, I'm going to remind you that this relationship exists. A couple other things that I would say, my boyfriend and I do not have any financial entanglements. We do not currently live together. But, I'm also going to commit to updating folks as that changes. Basically, I'm going to try to do the same job that I always do, try to bring the same skeptical, critical eye that I do to everything. But I'm also just going to remind you that I have this relationship. But, if you have questions about that, email the show, hardfork@nytimes.com. I will try to, answer any respectful questions that I can about this. Now,
Casey, I will just editorialize and add a little bit here to your disclosure, which I think is laudable, and I'm glad you're doing it. I'm glad you did it in your newsletter. I'm glad you're doing it on the podcast. I have known you for a long time. I have known how hard you have tried to avoid dating men who work in the technology industry.
I truly have. I mean, for more than 10 years, Kevin, I would be on apps like Tinder, and I would see that somebody cute worked at a Google, a Meta, a Twitter, you name it, and I would just always swipe left because I thought, I don't need that drama in my life. I don't need that complication.
Which is tough in San Francisco because everyone works in tech. It is a very small town, and the number of sort of eligible bachelors out there who do not work at one of the companies you cover limits your dating pool considerably.
It really did, and it sort of explains why I was mostly single for the last 10 years. And I thought, well, I finally found something that sort of gets me out of it, but, sometimes life just has other plans for you, and you kind of have to roll with the punches.
Yeah.
So here I am.
So here you are.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, thank you, Casey, for that disclosure. I think transparency is very important. We are obviously going to keep talking about developments in AI at Anthropic and elsewhere, but we will also put this disclosure in sort of the way we do when we talk about OpenAI and the fact that the New York Times company is suing OpenAI and Microsoft, alleging copyright violations.
Yeah, and when I disclosed this in my newsletter this week, Kevin, one reader actually replied that they thought it was cute that I would now have a disclosure to go along with your disclosure that you do every week. So we're sort of now one for one.
Let's proceed to the real meat of this segment, which is about AI news.
Because so many things happened.
Truly.
Yeah.
So let's start by talking about OpenAI. We've already made the disclosure. Don't have to do that one again. This was a big month for OpenAI. On December 20th, just before we headed out for break, they announced a new model called O3. This was a successor to O1. Funnily, they skipped O2 in the naming process because of a lawsuit threat from O2, the telecom company.
I'm not sure if it was a threat. They said they did it out of respect, but yes, presumably there would have been some sort of legal problems.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they skipped right over O2 to O3. This model is not yet available for users, but they did give a kind of preview of it to some researchers, and they also talked about how it had performed on some benchmark evaluations. Casey, tell us about O3.
What is O3? So O3 is a large language model, Kevin, like you would already find in ChatGPT, but it is built in a different way, and it's known as a reasoning model. And the reasoning models are a little bit different. A main way that they are different is how they are trained. So they are trained to try to be better at handling logical operations and structured data. The second big way that they are different is that when you make a query, you type into the little box whatever you want it to do, the reasoning model takes longer to go over it. It uses more computing power. It will take multiple passes through the data, and it will really try to bring true reasoning to what it is looking at. And so the result of taking more time, doing more passes, being structured in a slightly different way, is that it can perform a lot better on very complicated tasks. And what OpenAI found with O3 is that they were actually able to get way further on some of the hardest benchmarks ever designed for LLMs to pass than anything that has come before them.
Yes, we talked a little bit about this idea of test time inference or test time compute back when we discussed O1, their previous reasoning model. But this is basically a different step than the classic pre-training step of building a large language model. This is something that happens when the user makes the query. Instead of just spitting out an answer right away, it goes through the secondary test time step. And that is something that researchers were very excited about when O1 came out. They thought, okay, maybe if we are tapping out the limits of the pre-training step, maybe there is a kind of new scaling law developing around this test time or inference compute. And maybe if we pour more resources into that step, the models will get better along a different axis. And so what people were very excited about when O3 came out was that it looks like that actually worked.
Yes, and now this stuff is not yet in the hands of everyday users, but OpenAI did enter this O3 model in this really fascinating public competition known as the ARC Prize. You know the ARC Prize, Kevin?
Yes.
So the basic idea with the ARC Prize is they try to come up with problems that would be insanely difficult for an LLM to solve. And one of the ways that they're difficult, by the way, is that they are original problems. So these problems are known to not be in the training data of any of these models, because of course one of the criticisms of the LLMs is essentially, oh, well, you already have all that data stored, right? You just essentially did a quick search. So this prize says, no, we're not going to let you search. You actually are going to have to show that you can reason your way through something really difficult. So this ARC AGI 1 public training set has been around since at least 2020. And at that time, Kevin, GPT-3, previous OpenAI model, got a 0%, okay? So just 4 or 5 years ago, we were at 0%. In 2024, last year, GPT-4o got to 5%, okay? With O3, it gets to 75.7% in one evaluation where the limit was you could only spend $10,000 on computing power. In a second test where they let OpenAI spend as much money as they wanted, which we actually think it was like more than $1 million, O3 hit 87.5% on this model. So something that was essentially impossible through all of 2024, almost instantly, we have now hit 87.5% of that benchmark. And that is essentially the only public data we have about how good this thing is. But man, did that get people's attention.
Yeah, it got people's attention. I also saw a lot of people paying attention to O3's performance on something called Code Forces. This is a programming competition benchmark. And this is sort of one way that these AI companies try to assess how good their models are at coding. OpenAI's O3 received a rating on Code Forces of 2727. That is roughly equivalent to about the 179th best human competitive coder on the planet. And just for context, Sam Altman, in presenting this result, mentioned that only one programmer at OpenAI has a rating higher than 3,000 on Code Forces.
So why does this matter? Well, you think about some of the discussion that was happening at the end of 2024, Kevin, and you started to hear people saying, we are hitting a scaling wall. This was the phrase, right?
Yes.
And the idea was the techniques that we used to build the previous LLMs were just sort of running out of the low-hanging fruit, and it's going to require some sort of conceptual breakthrough in order for them to continue improving. And O3 comes along and effectively does just that. And what I think is so important about these benchmarks and why, we want to take some time today going through them is there's a lot of questions and criticism right now that is justified around how much are these things being hyped up, right? We know that the companies love to hype up their products and tell us, how incredible they are. But the benchmarks are something objective that you can actually use to measure their performance. And so when you have one of those benchmarks saying that there is now a model that is better than all but 179 people on Earth, well, it seems like we might be getting pretty close to superintelligence. Because what is superintelligence if not a system that is better than every human at something?
Yeah, and I would just add to that a little bit of caveat, which is that these so-called reasoning models, they seem, from what we know about them so far, to be very good at the kinds of tasks that you can design what are called reward functions for, which are things that have sort of a definite right answer, right? Coding, either the code runs or it doesn't. Math has a definite right and wrong answer. So in these domains where you can kind of give the reinforcement learning model a goal and the indicator of whether it is right or wrong in pursuing that goal, it tends to do very well. I think.
But if you asked it, what is the meaning of true love? It would never know. It wouldn't know the first thing about it, and I think that's beautiful.
Right. So I think for the short term, like the next year or two, we're going to have these early reasoning models that are very good and potentially even superhuman at some tasks, the kinds of tasks that have sort of definite right and wrong answers. But for other things like, fiction writing or life coaching or sort of these vaguer tasks that don't necessarily have one right and one wrong answer, they may not advance much beyond what we see today.
Yeah. And, some people will use that as an excuse to say, well, then this doesn't matter that much. And I would just point out that, at some point in your life, you're probably going to go see a surgeon, and that surgeon might be not that great of a painter, and it's not actually going to change the fact that the surgery that you got was very valuable, right? So I think it's important to think more in terms of what these things are capable of in the moment than what they are not capable of.
Yes. The other thing from OpenAI that we should talk about quickly is that Sam Altman wrote a new blog post on January 5th called Reflections, basically talking about some of his thoughts about the 2 years since ChatGPT was released. And the big headline from this blog post is that Sam Altman is claiming now that OpenAI knows how to build AGI, that the artificial general intelligence that people have been speculating about for years now, that OpenAI has been sort of hinting at, that they are within sight of that goal and that he believes it could happen very quickly, and that they are already starting to look past AGI to ASI, to artificial superintelligence. So, Casey, what did you make of this blog post?
Well, so I spent, basically a day trying to figure out what exactly does Sam mean when he says that they know how to build AGI. And another thing that happened this week, Kevin, is that Sam did an interview with Josh Tarangle at Bloomberg. And one of the things that he tells Josh is, I'm going to quote, I don't have deep, precise answers there yet, but if you could hire an AI as a remote employee to be a great software engineer, I think a lot of people would say, okay, that's AGI-ish. My interpretation, based on conversations that I had this week, is this actually is the destination that everyone has in mind for 2025. This is where the race is going. You are going to see all the big AI labs race to try to release a virtual AI coworker. And if they can do that, and if the coworker is pretty good, then they're going to say, this is actually what AGI is. Because at the moment, you can hire a sort of virtual entity to do some task or series of tasks in your companies that you no longer need a person for. That is where this entire thing has been driving the whole time.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it is not necessarily something that we need to accept uncritically, right? Sam Altman is a person with his own goals and motives, and OpenAI
and reward functions.
And we should, maybe apply some discount to what he says about his projections for AI, because he does have a vested stake in the outcome. But I think we should also just use this as sort of a sticking our finger in the wind of what conversations are happening in the AI scene in San Francisco. People here, I cannot emphasize this enough, are very sincere and very genuine about the fact that they believe that we are going to get AGI or something like it very, very soon, possibly this year.
Yeah, and when you look at the improvement in these models that we saw in December alone, I think you have to take them seriously.
Yes. Okay, moving on from OpenAI. Another thing that happened in December is that Google released Gemini 2.0, the new version of its flagship AI model. And Casey, have you tried it yet? What do you make of it?
I have not tried it yet, Kevin, because it is not in the sort of consumer brand Gemini that I pay for, with the exception of they have this new feature called Deep Research, where you can ask Gemini to sort of go and read the web and prepare a little report for you about something. I think I've only used it one time. It seemed like okay. To be candid with you, I have not followed the 2.0 stuff as closely because it just hasn't seemed as shocking or impressive as the OpenAI stuff. Have you?
I played around a little bit with Gemini 2.0, mostly in a series of demos that I got at Google before it came out. Some of what has been in there is sort of catching up with other models. Google also released a Gemini 2.0 flash thinking mode, which was their first kind of attempt at an inference time compute reasoning model similar to O1 and O3 from OpenAI. I have not played around with Gemini Deep Research mode yet, but I've heard people talking about how cool it is. So I'm excited to try that out. But people I trust, whose judgment I trust about this stuff, say that this is basically Google sort of announcing that it is on the same trajectory as OpenAI and all the other companies that are its peers and rivals, that it is going to be scaling up very quickly in 2025, and that we should look forward to more there.
Yes, although there was a post on X that went viral this week where someone asked Google, does corn get digested? And all of the image results are of AI slop that appear to be diagrams of corn and just make no sense whatsoever. And it's extremely funny. So maybe it'll be patched by the time this comes out. But if not, just go ahead and do an image search for does corn get digested, and you'll get a sense of where Google's AI search skills are at.
Got it. So in conclusion, Google is cooking in the AI department, but not much of this has gotten out into consumers' hands yet. And so I think that will be the question for 2025 is this stuff actually as good as Google says it is?
Yeah.
All right. The third and final story that we're going to catch up on today from over the break is something out of a Chinese company called DeepSeek. DeepSeek is a Chinese AI company. It's actually run by a Chinese hedge fund called High Flyer. And right around Christmas, as my house was getting robbed, they released a new model called DeepSeek V3 that ranks up there with some of the world's leading chatbots and caught a lot of people's attention.
Yeah, and look, I have not used this one yet, but there's a few things to know about this one. One is that it's really big. It has more than 680 billion parameters, which makes it significantly bigger than the largest model in Meta's Llama series, which I would say up to this point has been sort of the gold standard for open models. That one has 405 billion parameters. But the really, really important thing about DeepSeek is that it apparently was trained at a cost of $5.5 million. And so what that means is you now have an LLM that is about as good as the state of the art that was trained for a tiny fraction of what something like Llama or a GPT was trained for. I saw some speculation from this great blogger, Simon Willison, who said it seems like the export controls that the U.S. is placing on chips is actually inspiring these Chinese developers to get much better at optimizing. And indeed, you now have this state-of-the-art model for $5.5 million. So this is a huge step toward the proliferation of LLMs everywhere.
Yeah, let me just back up and go a little more slowly through what you just described, because I think it's really important.
I was trying to go really slowly.
I need a slower.
All right.
I don't need. I need the deep research mode here.
Okay.
So one of the big questions over the past 5 or so years is about the Chinese AI industry and where they are relative to the leading frontier AI labs in the US. And whether we need to be doing more to kind of slow them down, and if we even can slow them down, or if this stuff is just kind of common knowledge that as soon as someone invents a new way of doing AI, it spreads throughout the world and there's not much you can do to stop it. One of the things that we've done in the United States was to pass something called the CHIPS Act, along with a set of controls that basically limited which AI chips you could export to China. And we put a lot of faith in the ability of these restrictions to effectively constrain the Chinese AI industry. If they couldn't get the latest chips out of NVIDIA and other companies, they wouldn't be able to build models that were competitive with the state-of-the-art US models. And that was one way that we were going to sort of try to keep our national advantage. What DeepSeek, I think, has showed, or at least what they have hinted at, is the possibility that China is actually not that far behind. Because this model, whatever you think about it, I have not tried it myself, but according to its benchmarks, it is up there in many respects with the latest and greatest models from companies like OpenAI and Google and Anthropic. It is, according to some measures, the highest ranking open source or open weights model that we have. And it does not appear to have needed the latest and greatest hardware to be trained on. So according to the report that DeepSeek put out, they trained this new model, V3, at an estimated cost of about $5.5 million. And they did it not on the leading edge NVIDIA H100 or A100 chips that all the big AI labs use, but on a different version of NVIDIA chips known as the H800, which is basically just a less capable version of the state-of-the-art chips from NVIDIA. And so I think what this all boils down to is the conclusion that regulating AI by limiting access to hardware is just going to be much more complicated than we thought. One interpretation would be that you actually can't stop China from building state-of-the-art foundation models, and that our regulatory regime just isn't going to cut it when it comes to keeping the US ahead of China. What do you make of that?
So, I mean, the first thing I would say is I do get a little bit nervous when people frame the debate this way, because I think a lot of the people who try to frame the AI story as a race between the United States and China are sort of very hawkish and leading us to a potential conflict that I would rather avoid. And it also presupposes that all of the American companies have to race as fast as they can, and they have to build AGI as fast as they can, even if it means cutting corners on safety, because otherwise, this looming specter of China and everything that could happen. So I just would sort of say we don't necessarily have to do that. We can choose to still, move somewhat deliberately and with caution here. But do I think that this shows that it is going to be harder to prevent China from developing extremely high-end models and that regulations will be more complicated? Yes, absolutely.
All right, Casey, that is a small fraction of what happened in AI while we were gone.
But probably the most important things.
I think we covered most of what really mattered. And if there's one thing that we can be sure of in 2025, it's that we are going to be very busy talking about more AI changes and progress.
You know, somebody was telling me that if like 2023 was a year that made everybody say, oh my gosh, AI is going so fast, and 2024 was a year that felt very business as usual, 2025 is a year where we could be going back to, oh my gosh, AI is going so fast, and then maybe it'll just feel like that all the time forever.
Isn't that a pleasant thought?
Yeah. So anyway, Happy New Year.
AI vertigo forever.
Forever. Hey, that's the end of this clip. If you liked what you saw, head on over to our page and subscribe, and you can get the full podcast. We do a show like this almost every week on tech and the future. Head on over there now and subscribe.